Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to talk about the Vikings. As with all our topics, there's going to be a quiz at the end. So stay tuned and see how much you know about the Vikings. Were they really wearing horns? The image of a Viking warrior clad in fearsome armor, his helmet adorned with massive curved horns, is one of the most enduring and recognizable symbols of the medieval seafarers. This iconic depiction has been immortalized in art, literature, and modern media, from 19th century operas to contemporary films and television series. Yet, despite its widespread acceptance in popular culture, the question remains, did the Vikings truly wear horned helmets, or is this a myth that has been perpetuated over centuries? To uncover the truth, we must delve into the historical and archaeological evidence surrounding Viking attire, particularly their headgear. The Vikings, who raided, traded, and settled across Europe from the late 8th to the early 11th century, left behind a wealth of artifacts, including weapons, jewelry, and fragments of clothing. However, among these discoveries, one notable absence stands out: the horned helmet. Archaeological excavations of Viking burial sites, settlements, and battlefields have yielded numerous helmets, yet none have been found with horns attached. The few surviving Viking helmets, such as the well-preserved German Boo helmet discovered in Norway, are simple, rounded designs made of iron, often featuring a nose guard for added protection. These helmets were practical, designed for combat rather than ceremonial display, and their construction prioritized functionality over ornamentation. So if the Vikings did not wear horned helmets, where did this misconception originate? The answer lies in a combination of artistic misinterpretation, romanticized nationalism, and the blending of different historical cultures. One of the earliest sources of the horned Viking image can be traced back to the 19th century, during a period of renewed European interest in medieval history and Norse mythology. Artists and writers, inspired by the Romantic movement, sought to depict the Vikings as larger-than-life figures, embodying both the savage warrior and the noble barbarian. This romanticized vision was further popularized by Richard Wagner's famous opera cycle Der Ring des Nibelungen, in which costume designers outfitted the Viking-inspired characters with horned helmets to enhance their dramatic and mythical appearance. However, the association of horns with warriors predates the Viking age by centuries. Ancient civilizations, such as the Celts and Germanic tribes, did incorporate horned and winged helmets into their ceremonial attire, as evidenced by archaeological finds like the Waterloo helmet from Britain dated to around 150 to 50 BCE. These helmets were likely used for religious rituals or as status symbols rather than in battle. Over time, as historical accounts and artistic representations merged, the distinction between different warrior cultures blurred, leading to the erroneous attribution of horned helmets to the Vikings. Another contributing factor to the myth was the Christian chroniclers who documented Viking raids. These writers often portrayed the Norsemen as devilish invaders, and the addition of horns to their descriptions may have been a deliberate attempt to associate them with demonic imagery. In medieval Christian iconography, horns were symbolic of evil, and thus the depiction of pagan warriors with such features reinforced the narrative of the Vikings as godless marauders. The persistence of the horned Viking myth in popular culture is likely due to a combination of factors. The romantic notion of the Viking as a larger-than-life figure, the artistic appeal of the horned helmet, and the enduring fascination with Norse mythology have all contributed to its continued presence in literature, film, and art. Despite the lack of historical evidence, the image of the horned Viking continues to capture the imagination, serving as a powerful symbol of the Northmen's legendary status. Now let's take a look at some other interesting facts about Viking helmets. Viking helmets were practical pieces of equipment designed primarily for protection in battle. While modern depictions often portray them as elaborate and ornate, archaeological evidence suggests that Viking helmets were generally simple and functional. Crafted from materials such as iron or leather, these helmets were intended to withstand the rigors of combat without hindering the wearer's mobility. Some helmets featured a nasal bar for added facial protection, but elaborate decorations were rare. The primary objective was to create a lightweight, durable head covering that allowed for quick and agile combat movements. During the Viking Age, which spanned from the 8th to the 11th centuries, the people known as Vikings hailed from various Scandinavian regions, including Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. These seafaring warriors, traders, and explorers left a lasting impact on European history through their raids, exploration, and settlement in new territories. Viking ships were a testament to their advanced shipbuilding techniques. Known for their speed and maneuverability, Viking ships, particularly the longships, were crucial for their expansion and trade across vast distances. These ships enabled the Vikings to explore and raid along both coastal and inland waterways, facilitating their movement across Europe, the British Isles, the Mediterranean, and even North America. Viking society was structured with a strong emphasis on honor, loyalty, and the pursuit of glory. Their social hierarchy included jarls or nobles, freemen, and thralls or slaves. While Viking society was relatively egalitarian compared to other contemporary societies, there existed a significant disparity between the elite class and the commoners. Viking religion, known as Norse or Germanic paganism, was a polytheistic faith that revered gods such as Odin, Thor, and Loki. It played a significant role in shaping Viking culture, influencing their beliefs in fate, bravery, and the afterlife. The Vikings also held festivals and rituals honoring their gods, which often involved human sacrifice and a celebration of the natural world. Viking art is renowned for its intricate and symbolic designs, often depicting scenes from Norse mythology or everyday life. Notable examples include the Oseberg and Gokstad ship burials, which showcase the craftsmanship and artistic skill of the Viking artisans. Viking art serves as a valuable resource for understanding their cultural values and beliefs. Viking runes, an ancient Germanic script, holds a significant place in their culture and history. Runes were inscribed on various objects, such as stones, jewelry, and weapons, and served as a means of communication, record-keeping, and magical practice. Rune stones, which bear inscriptions in the runic script, provide valuable insights into Viking society, beliefs, and even personal stories. Viking sagas, a genre of Norse literature, recount tales of heroic deeds, adventures, and historical events during the Viking Age. These stories, often featuring legendary figures from Norse mythology, were traditionally composed and transmitted orally before being written down in the 13th century. Famous sagas include the Volsunga saga and the saga of Eric the Red. As mentioned earlier, the Viking Age marked a significant era in European history, characterized by Viking expansion, exploration, and trade across vast distances. This period witnessed the Norsemen's voyages to the British Isles, the Mediterranean, and even the Americas, contributing to the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural influences between different regions. During the Viking Age, Norsemen established settlements and trading posts in various locations, including the Danelaw in England, Normandy in France, and along the Volga River in Russia. These settlements facilitated trade and cultural exchange between the Vikings and other European populations. In conclusion, the Vikings left an indelible mark on European history with their seafaring adventures, raids, and cultural exchanges. Their innovations in shipbuilding, their distinctive art, and their rich mythology continue to fascinate us today. Understanding the Vikings provides a glimpse into a pivotal era that shaped the course of European civilization. So what do you think? Were you surprised by the information you learned today? Number 1. What is the name of the famous Viking warrior god associated with thunder and lightning? The answer is Thor. Number 2. What type of helmet did the Vikings most likely wear into battle? The answer is a simple, rounded helmet made of iron or leather. No. 3. During which centuries did the Viking Age take place? The answer is the 8th to the 11th centuries. And no. 4. What is the name of the ancient Germanic script used by the Vikings? The answer is runes. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. Hello, friends. Imagine you are a resident of Northern Europe during the 8th to 11th centuries. Your life is tough, There is hardly anything to eat in the north except fish and occasionally reindeer or seal meat. You're constantly at war with your neighbors for land and resources, and the only thing you can do to get something to eat or find shelter is to take it from someone else. And since there's no police around here, if you don't want someone to rob you, then you must be prepared to rob others yourself. Such conditions foster the emergence of the most ruthless warriors in history. And what could be more inspiring than the sight of a ferocious warrior with sharp teeth and horns on his helmet charging into battle? You might think it's a scene from a movie. But no, this is how Viking warriors looked in the pictures drawn by our ancestors. That is, except for the horns on their helmets. So let's talk about why do Vikings always wear horned helmets in pictures? Let's find out. Today, we are used to thinking that Vikings were some kind of monsters with axes and horned helmets. And when you watch a movie about them, it is almost never without those axes and helmets. It turns out that in fact, the Vikings didn't wear horns on their helmets at all. All the archaeological finds don't even hint at such adornments. Most likely, the Vikings either shaved their heads completely or made small braids from their hair, putting them under a helmet. This is evidenced by the burial grounds of the Vikings, which contain many male skulls with shaved areas around the edges. Of course, archaeologists cannot say for sure that the Vikings did it for purely hygienic reasons and not to make room for their horns under their helmets. But isn't it much more interesting to imagine that those very famous horned helmets of the Vikings were just a figment of our imagination? So let's look at where this widespread myth came from. There are two main versions. The first one is related to the German writer Richard Wagner and his four-part music drama called Der Ring des Nibelungen, which was based on Norse mythology and was performed for the first time in 1876. In his opera, Wagner gave instructions to dress the warriors in long tunics, tights, and pointed helmets with horns. And although there is nothing similar in the original myths, in his music drama, he created a whole nation of fierce giants with horns on their heads. Later, the world learned about this horrible race from books. The second version says that everything started with the illustrations. Many artists depicted Vikings as monsters with horns on their heads, and it's largely thanks to them that we now think that Vikings looked like that. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, many books about Vikings were illustrated by artists who drew them exactly with horns on their heads. And then these illustrations got into the textbooks. Then everyone started drawing them like that, including me. I mean, yeah, I remember drawing Vikings with horns in elementary school. It seems to me that most of us did. Here is an example. Look, textbook pages depicting Vikings. Are you surprised? I bet you were taught exactly the same thing at school. But where did the artists themselves get the idea to draw Vikings with horns? There are several theories. The first one refers to the operas of Richard Wagner again. As we know in his works, the Germans were portrayed as ferocious giants with horns. Thus, artists who drew Vikings probably took this detail from Wagner's work. Perhaps that's where the horns came from. The second version connects the appearance of horns with another Nordic people, the Goths. They had the custom of tying a bunch of straw or horsehair into long braids and decorating them with silver ornaments. Instead of a crown, they often wore a wreath made of interwoven braids. The warriors wore similar decorations on their helmets. This tradition persisted until the 18th century, and therefore many of the Gothic helmets found by archaeologists have traces of these peculiar braids on them. So the artists may have taken this detail and attributed it to the Vikings. The third theory considers the Scandinavian revival movement of the 19th century to be the reason for the emergence of horns. At that time, interest in its history and culture sharply increased among the population of Scandinavia. However, the Scandinavians knew little about the appearance of their ancestors. Therefore, artists who created portraits of Vikings based on the few surviving archaeological finds added various details to the warriors' outfits at their own discretion. Since many of them relied on Norse mythology, the Vikings eventually acquired horns on their helmets. But what's interesting is that the ancient Vikings may have really worn horned helmets, only not those ones. Now hold on to your papers because we are going to travel back in time and see how Vikings imagined themselves. According to sagas, these are ancient written stories that originated in Iceland around the 13th century and tell about the exploits of heroic ancestors. Sagas are not just fictional stories, they contain real historical events and describe the lifestyle of the Vikings. In the sagas, the Vikings are often called Skrælings or Skrillingar, and it is said that they lived beyond the ocean, far to the north. The Skrælings are described as hairy and ugly creatures, huge of size, and wearing strange helmets on their heads. Archaeologists believe that the ancient Vikings superimposed their ideas of the Skrælings onto their own ethnic group, calling them Saxons and giving them all the qualities that the ancient Norwegians disliked in themselves. The Saxons were warlike and lived in a harsh climate, so they needed special protection for themselves. Their armor consisted of leather and ring mail, and to protect their heads, they wore conical helmets made of leather and iron, decorated with strange horns. The purpose of these horns was purely utilitarian. First, they were designed to keep the helmet in place while protecting the warrior's face. Secondly, they prevented the shield from slipping off. The horns were fixed on a special rim that ran along the edge of the helmet and overlapped the warrior's eyebrows. The rim had holes for fastening the nasal bandage. The space between the horns and the rim was filled with leather straps that protected the sides of the face and helped to keep the helmet on the warrior's head. These helmets were used by the Scots, Picts, Gauls, and other Germanic tribes. This description is reminiscent of the ancient Scythians, who were known to have used horned helmets, too. True, the Scythians wore them in the 7th century BC, and there is no evidence that the Vikings knew about the Scythians and copied their helmets. Although there is another version that exactly the same helmets were used both by the ancient Scythians and the Vikings, only the Vikings wore them 1,000 years later. It is possible that the Vikings saw the horned helmets of the Scythians as magical and endowed them with supernatural powers, and therefore the stories of the Scythians' invincibility reached us. Another interesting fact is that the horned helmet of the ancient Scythians was considered a symbol of the sun god, and the god of thunder, Odin, also had a similar attribute. One way or another, but the Vikings did not use horned helmets in battles. If they did, it would be hard to surprise their opponents. It is much easier to sneak up on someone if you are making noise by hitting your horns against each other. Besides, according to sagas, the Vikings preferred fighting naked to scare their opponents. What could be more frightening than a wild man covered with tattoos charging at you with a battle axe? A man with horns on his head? Probably not. The Vikings didn't need any extra embellishments to strike fear into their enemies. Their reputation was already enough. If you want to learn more about the Vikings, check out our video about their weapons. And that's all for today. Have you ever wondered if the Vikings really wore horned helmets? The image of Viking warriors wearing horned helmets has endured throughout history and continues to captivate our imaginations today. It's a common sight in films, novels, modern artwork, and all sorts of other media. But have you ever stopped to think if it's true? In this video, we are going to explore the origins of this enduring image and find out if there is any truth to it at all. Let's jump right in. When it comes to understanding Viking culture, archaeology plays a crucial role. And when we look at the archaeological record, we find very little evidence to support the idea that Vikings wore horned helmets. Most of the discoveries related to Viking helmets date to periods before the Viking Age or belong to entirely different cultures. In Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, where Viking civilization flourished, very few complete helmets have been found, and most of them lack any horn-like decorations. For example, the German Boo helmet is one of the most famous Viking helmets ever discovered. Found in a burial mound near the town of German Boo in Norway, it dates back to the 9th century and was likely crafted around the year 850 AD. This helmet is made of iron and was probably owned by a wealthy member of society due to its ornate design and construction. But what makes it so special and famous is that it was buried alongside a warrior's skeleton, suggesting that it was used in battle. Overall, the helmet is relatively small, only having a capacity of about 6 liters, which suggests that it was probably intended to protect the head rather than cover the entire face. This would have allowed for better visibility and maneuverability in combat, making it easier for the warrior to wield weapons and perform other necessary actions. But what makes the helmet truly unique is its distinctive eye protection. Instead of being open or covered with a grill, the German Boo helmet features a set of goggles that were attached to the sides of the helmet. These goggles were designed to protect the eyes from incoming projectiles like arrows, as well as to shield the face from wind and weather. They consisted of 2 pieces of iron that were bent into a U-shape and attached to the helmet with rivets. These were then covered with a layer of leather or cloth to provide a more comfortable fit. While the exact purpose of the goggles is still debated among historians and archaeologists, it is generally believed that they were intended to provide much-needed protection in battle while still allowing for good visibility. Their inclusion on the helmet may have also served a psychological purpose, intimidating opponents and giving the wearer a more imposing presence on the battlefield. So what does the German Boo helmet tell us about Viking helmets and the use of horns? Well, firstly, it shows that Vikings cared about protecting their heads in battle, but didn't seem to feel the need to cover their faces. Secondly, it demonstrates that Vikings were practical and functional people who didn't use unnecessary embellishments in their equipment. There are no horns on this helmet, nor any other Viking helmet found in Scandinavia. Of course, this doesn't mean that some Vikings didn't wear horned helmets, but it does suggest that it wasn't a common practice. After all, there are plenty of horned artifacts from the Viking Age that have no connection to helmets. For example, drinking horns were very popular among Vikings, as well as various horn decorations used in homes and on clothing. These objects demonstrate that Vikings appreciated the symbolism of horns, but it is a stretch to say that they were obsessed with them to the point of putting them on their helmets. However, another interesting artifact is the Vikso helmets. These are 2 bronze helmets decorated with 2 long horns on top, each measuring about 33 centimeters long. They were discovered in separate graves from the late 9th and early 10th centuries in Berger, an important Viking Age trading center in Sweden. These helmets predate the Viking Age by several centuries and have no clear parallel in other cultures. Some scholars have suggested that they were influenced by the earlier Unnetis culture, which had a tradition of wearing horned helmets. However, others argue that they represent a more localized phenomenon that cannot be easily explained. What makes the Vixis helmets especially intriguing is that they show a clear influence of earlier traditions, suggesting that the idea of wearing horned helmets was not completely new during the Viking Age. Instead, it was a reinterpretation of earlier cultural elements. But what about written sources? Surely there must be some evidence of horned helmets in Viking sagas or other contemporary accounts, right? Unfortunately, when we examine the archaeological record, we find very little evidence to support the idea that Vikings wore horned helmets. Most of the discoveries related to Viking helmets date to periods before the Viking Age or belong to entirely different cultures. In Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, where Viking civilization flourished, very few complete helmets have been found, and most of them lack any horn-like decorations. The helmets that have been discovered were simple in design, made of iron or leather, and were primarily intended to protect the head in battle. There is, however, one notable exception: the German Boo helmet. This helmet was discovered in a grave in Norway and is thought to have been worn by a warrior. It dates back to the 9th century and is made of iron. Unlike many other Viking helmets, it has no horns. Instead, it features a distinctive set of goggles that were designed to protect the wearer's eyes in battle. Overall, the helmet was likely used for protection against blows and slashes, but not for covering the entire face. Now, let's talk about those pesky written sources. How do they shed light on the Viking helmet debate? Unfortunately, when it comes to horned helmets, the written sources don't provide much clarity either. Most of the descriptions of Viking helmets come from Christian monks who often depicted Vikings as savage barbarians. They wrote stories of ferocious warriors who went into battle wearing horned helmets, but these accounts are likely more a reflection of the author's own beliefs and biases than an accurate description of Viking practices. To make matters worse, many of these accounts come from much later, long after the Viking Age had ended. So we can't be sure if they were based on actual Viking traditions or on later folklore and legends. But wait, there's more. There is one more piece of evidence that seems to support the idea of horned helmets, and that is the artwork from the Viking Age itself. Horned helmets are a common feature in many Viking Age artifacts, including runestones, animal bones, and even a few pieces of contemporary art. However, it's important to remember that these depictions may not necessarily represent what Vikings actually wore. Instead, they may have been created for symbolic or artistic purposes. Ultimately, without any concrete evidence, it's impossible to say for sure if horned helmets were ever really used by Vikings. So what's the verdict? Were Viking helmets really horned? Well, the archaeological evidence doesn't really support the idea. Most of the discoveries related to Viking helmets date to periods before the Viking Age or belong to entirely different cultures. In Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, where Viking civilization flourished, very few complete helmets have been found, and most lack any horn-like decorations. Instead, the helmets discovered were simple in design, made of iron or leather, primarily intended to protect the head in battle. Even the famous German Buh helmet, which was likely used by a warrior, has no horns. It is true that some Viking artifacts like the Vixus helmets and various pieces of artwork depict horned helmets. However, these depictions may not accurately reflect Viking combat practices. Instead, they may represent a later interpretation of Viking culture or be based on earlier traditions that had no real bearing on Viking warfare. Ultimately, the idea of Vikings wearing horned helmets is more myth than reality. That being said, it's a myth that has captured the imagination of many people throughout history, and perhaps that's why the legend persists. In the end, it doesn't really matter whether Vikings wore horned helmets or not. What matters is that their image has become a powerful symbol of a culture that was defined by exploration, adventure, and a willingness to take on the unknown. During the Bronze Age, there was a significant cultural shift across various regions. One of the most striking changes was the emergence of a plethora of horned helmets, particularly in areas like Northern Europe and the Mediterranean. Now, this raises a big question for archaeologists and historians. If these helmets were meant for battle, why did they have large protruding horns? It seems impractical and even counterproductive to wear such cumbersome headgear into the thick of the fight. So what was the real reason behind this peculiar fashion statement? Today, let us explore the mysterious world of these horned helmets and try to shed some light on the reasons behind their creation. Before we dive into our discussion, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest videos. And if you enjoy what you see, don't forget to give us a like. Now let's get back to our topic. During the Bronze Age, which spanned from roughly 3300 BC to 1200 BC, many cultures across the globe experienced a surge in population and urbanization. This era marked a significant leap in human history as people transitioned from using stone tools to working with metals like bronze, leading to more advanced weaponry and tools. In Northern Europe, the Bronze Age is often referred to as the Yam Neolithic because the transition from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age was less abrupt compared to other regions. This gradual change occurred over a span of several centuries, with the arrival of new technologies and cultural influences from neighboring areas. Consequently, the end of the Bronze Age in Northern Europe was also more drawn out, lasting until around the 8th century BC, when the Iron Age began. In contrast, the Mediterranean region experienced a more defined Bronze Age, typically divided into three distinct phases: early, middle, and late Bronze Age. The early Bronze Age here began around 3000 BC and ended at around 2000 BC, marking the start of a period of increasing trade and cultural exchange between different Mediterranean societies. The Middle Bronze Age lasted from 2000 BC to 1600 BC, a time when civilizations like the Mycenaeans flourished. Finally, the Late Bronze Age spanned from 1600 BC to 1200 BC, ending with the collapse of many established civilizations. This cultural shift during the Bronze Age was reflected in various aspects of life, including art, religion, and warfare. Interestingly, despite being separated by geographical distance and distinct cultural traits, the societies of Northern and Mediterranean Europe shared one commonality: a fascination with horned helmets. When we analyze the archaeological record of horned helmets, we notice that they predominantly date back to the Late Bronze Age, suggesting a possible connection to broader cultural changes happening during that time. During the Late Bronze Age, many civilizations across the globe experienced significant transformations, including the collapse of empires and the emergence of new cultural influences. For example, in the Mediterranean, the Late Bronze Age witnessed the decline of the Mycenaean civilization and the subsequent emergence of the Iron Age. Similarly, in Northern Europe, the Late Bronze Age saw the end of the local Bronze Age culture and the beginning of new cultural horizons. These changes may have contributed to the popularity of horned helmets as a symbol of a break from the past and an embrace of new cultural identities. During this era, people began to experiment with different artistic motifs, including incorporating animal imagery like bulls and stags. This is evident in various artifacts found at archaeological sites, including weapons, jewelry, and everyday objects. However, when it comes to horned helmets, it's important to note that not all societies adopted this trend. For instance, the D-ring or Phrygian helmets remained popular in Greece throughout the Archaic and Classical periods, while the Eastern Mediterranean cultures favored different styles like the Syrian helmet. This suggests that the use of horned helmets was not a universal phenomenon, but rather a localized trend within specific cultures during the Bronze Age. The widespread adoption of horned helmets during the Late Bronze Age may have been influenced by a combination of factors, including religious beliefs, artistic motifs, and cultural exchanges. As we delve deeper into understanding the cultural context of these helmets, we begin to uncover the reasons behind their popularity. In many ancient civilizations, horns held deep religious and mythological significance. For example, in Celtic culture, the god Cernunnos was often depicted wearing a crown of antlers, symbolizing his connection to the natural world and his role as the deity of fertility and animals. Similarly, in Greek mythology, the god Pan, who inhabited forests and mountains, was also shown with horns, representing his wild and untamed nature. These horned deities played a significant role in people's religious beliefs and practices, and their imagery was widely incorporated into art and daily life. Furthermore, the use of horns can be traced back to prehistoric times, with early humans creating cave paintings and sculptures depicting animals with prominent horns. This suggests that horns were seen as powerful symbols long before the Bronze Age, representing strength, courage, and connection to the divine. People believed that by incorporating horns into their clothing and accessories, they could harness some of these qualities and gain favor from the gods. As we examine the archaeological evidence of horned helmets, it's important to consider the religious context of their usage. Many scholars believe that these helmets were primarily used in religious rituals or ceremonies rather than in warfare. The large horns on these helmets were not only impractical for battle, but also symbolized the wearer's devotion to the gods and their willingness to embody certain deities or mythical creatures. For example, the famous Gundestrup cauldron, an artifact from the Late Bronze Age, depicts various horned figures, possibly representing deities or ancestral spirits. The inclusion of horns in this artwork reinforces the connection between these objects and religious practices. Additionally, the discovery of horned helmets alongside other ritualistic items and burial goods supports the theory that they played a significant role in religious ceremonies. However, the true extent and purpose of their use in rituals remain open to interpretation. Some researchers suggest that horned helmets were worn by warriors during battle as a form of intimidation, striking fear into their opponents through their imposing appearance. This theory is supported by the fact that many horned helmets were found in areas associated with warfare and human remains. The idea that these helmets were used to psychologically dominate enemies before battle aligns with the ancient practice of deifying warriors and the belief in the protective power of gods in warfare. By instilling fear and reverence in their enemies, warriors with horned helmets may have been perceived as more formidable and their victories attributed to divine favor. This theory helps explain the prevalence of horned helmets in societies that placed a strong emphasis on military prowess and the role of religion in daily life. While horned helmets may not have been exclusively used for warfare, their presence in battle certainly added a layer of intimidation and psychological warfare to ancient conflicts. In conclusion, the widespread use of horned helmets during the Late Bronze Age reflects a fascinating aspect of human culture and belief systems. These helmets were not just practical tools of war, but powerful symbols imbued with religious and mythological significance. By examining the archaeological evidence, religious context, and cultural beliefs of the time, we can appreciate the reasons behind the popularity of horned helmets in various Bronze Age societies. From the realm of Celtic mythology to the imagery of Greek gods, horns represented strength, courage, and a connection to the divine. People adorned themselves with horns, believing it would grant them favor from the gods and enhance their presence. While their use in warfare is often debated, these helmets played a significant role in religious rituals, allowing individuals to embody deities or mythical creatures during ceremonies. The imposing sight of warriors wearing horned helmets may have also been used as a form of psychological warfare, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. As we continue to explore the mysteries of the Bronze Age, these horned helmets serve as a reminder of the rich tapestry of human culture and the enduring fascination with symbols of power and divinity. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about similar topics, we highly recommend checking out our video on the 7 most epic helmets ever created. You'll have the opportunity to learn about various helmets from different historical periods and cultures, each with its unique design and purpose. We explore the craftsmanship, materials, and symbolism behind these helmets, providing insights into the societies that created them. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of history. In the grand saga of the Viking Age, where tales of daring raids and epic battles dominated the narrative, there existed a tradition so intriguing yet so contentious that it continues to spark heated debates among historians. Did Vikings really wear horns on their helmets? This isn't just a question from a history buff. It is a query that cuts to the heart of how we perceive one of history's most fascinating cultures. Were the Vikings, known for their fierce reputation, adorned with horns as part of a bloodthirsty war ritual? Or is this a fanciful embellishment, a mythical addition to a culture that history has perhaps exaggerated? Let's dig into the rich tapestry of Viking traditions, separating fact from fiction, and explore the truth behind the horned helmet. Now, before we dive into the truth behind the Vikings and their potential use of horns, let me ask you a question. What comes to your mind when you hear the term Viking? Is it tales of courageous seafarers, images of mighty warriors, or maybe legends of fearsome berserkers? Whatever your thoughts may be, one thing is sure, Vikings were more than just ruthless pillagers. They were traders, explorers, and settlers. And understanding their culture requires looking beyond the common stereotypes. Now, if you're enjoying this video and want to learn more about the fascinating world of the Vikings, be sure to hit that subscribe button and never miss out on our new releases. The origins of the horned helmet can be traced back to the rich folklore and mythology of the Viking Age. In Norse mythology, animals held deep symbolic meaning, particularly bulls and stags. These creatures were seen as embodiments of primal forces of nature and were closely associated with the realm of the gods. Bulls, for instance, were linked to the god Thor, representing strength, power, and fertility. Stags, on the other hand, were connected to the god Odin, symbolizing wisdom, magic, and the hunt. During the Viking Age, these symbols weren't just confined to religious texts. They permeated everyday life. Animal motifs, especially of bulls and stags, were commonly found in art, carvings, and even everyday objects. This prevalence points to the profound respect and reverence the Vikings had for these creatures. Now, let's shift our focus to the Vikings' belief system. In Norse paganism, there was a strong belief in the interconnectedness of all living things. The Vikings believed that the boundary between the human and animal world was thin, and that through rituals and ceremonies, they could communicate with the spirits of animals and even transform into them. This animistic view of the world led to a deep respect for animals and an understanding of their place in the natural order. It was believed that by wearing the horns of an animal, one could embody its spirit and gain access to its powers. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, but a way of physically transforming oneself. It was a form of shamanism, a practice where individuals could alter their consciousness and enter into a trance-like state to communicate with the spiritual realm. Let's now examine the evidence. When we talk about the Vikings and their potential use of horns, it's important to remember that much of their culture was not recorded in writing, but was passed down through oral traditions. This makes it challenging to separate fact from fiction, as stories often got embellished over time. However, there are a few archaeological findings that shed light on this intriguing aspect of Viking culture. One piece of evidence comes from the discovery of ritualistic horned helmets in Sweden. While these helmets might not be exactly what we picture when we think of Viking battle helmets, they do offer insight into the use of horns in religious contexts. Another source of information comes from runic inscriptions. Runes were not only used as a form of writing, but also as a decorative element on various objects, including stones and amulets. Some of these runic inscriptions feature imagery of horned figures, which might represent deities or individuals in a ritualistic setting. Studying these inscriptions provides a glimpse into the Vikings' religious beliefs and practices. Finally, sagas or stories about the Vikings that were written down in the 13th century also offer some clues. These sagas, though written long after the Viking Age, contain elements of oral traditions that might have been passed down for generations. They provide a narrative of a society deeply rooted in mythology and folklore. The use of horns by the Vikings wasn't just a symbol of their religious beliefs. It was a tangible link to the spiritual world. It was a way to invoke the blessings of the gods, seek their favor, and ensure success in their endeavors. For a culture that placed great importance on tradition and ritual, the use of horns was a powerful way to maintain a connection to their past and the wisdom it held. The Vikings believed that the natural world was alive with spirits, and their rituals often aimed to honor and appease these spirits. The use of horns in their ceremonies was most likely part of this larger framework of beliefs and practices. It was a way to show respect for the balance of nature and the forces that shaped their world. As we delve deeper into the Viking Age, it becomes clear that their culture was far from the monolithic portrayal of pillaging barbarians. They were a complex society with deep spiritual beliefs, rich traditions, and a profound connection to the natural world around them. Their use of horns, far from being a mere symbol of violence, was a nuanced practice rooted in their religious beliefs and worldview. As we continue to uncover the mysteries of the Viking Age, it's essential to approach each discovery with an open mind. The Vikings' use of horns is a testament to this. It challenges us to look beyond surface appearances and delve into the rich tapestry of their culture, reminding us that history is filled with surprises that challenge our perceptions. The idea of Vikings wearing horns has captured the imagination of many. It's been depicted in art, literature, and film, often portraying Vikings as ferocious warriors ready to charge into battle at the mere hint of conflict. But this portrayal doesn't truly capture the essence of who the Vikings were. Their culture was rich, complex, and deeply rooted in the natural world. The Vikings' use of horns serves as a reminder of this, offering a glimpse into a world where strength was revered, nature was respected, and the boundaries between the physical and spiritual were blurred. It's important to note that while archaeological evidence of horned helmets in battle is scarce, that doesn't automatically make their use in ceremonies and rituals less significant. The Vikings' spiritual beliefs were a central part of their lives, and their use of horns in religious practices was likely a deeply meaningful and integral part of their culture. Understanding the Vikings' use of horns requires a shift in perspective. It challenges us to move beyond the common stereotypes and delve into the complexities of their culture. It invites us to appreciate the depth of their spiritual beliefs and their profound connection to the natural world. The Vikings' use of horns wasn't just a symbol of power or a tool for invoking the gods. It was a reflection of their worldview, a way of life deeply intertwined with the rhythms and mysteries of the natural world. It was a testament to their belief in the interconnectedness of all things, a belief that continues to resonate with those who seek a deeper understanding of the world around them. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. We've explored the rich tapestry of Viking culture and uncovered the fascinating insights into their beliefs and practices. If you've enjoyed this video and want to continue learning about the Vikings and other historical civilizations, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In the annals of history, few images are as enduring and instantly recognizable as that of the Viking warrior. Clad in a horned helmet, shield, and armor, he stands as a symbol of ferocity and adventure. But here's the intriguing part. Did Vikings really wear helmets adorned with horns? The answer, as it often does, lies in the details. Join us as we embark on a journey through time to uncover the truth behind the horned Viking helmet. But before we delve into the saga of the horned helmet, we'd like to send a big thank you to our supporters. Your support allows us to bring these videos to a wider audience and keep the historical tales alive. If you too would like to join our community of supporters and get exclusive perks such as behind-the-scenes content, access to our server, and your name in the credits, please check the links below. And now, let's dive into the tale of the horned Viking helmet. Fasten your seatbelts because we're about to take a whirlwind tour through time, specifically the 19th century, a period when the image of the Viking underwent a remarkable transformation. It was during this era that the romanticized notion of the Viking as a fierce warrior clad in a horned helmet took root and spread like wildfire. And if you're curious about why the Vikings, known for their exploration, trading, and military expeditions, needed such a headgear, then you're in for a treat. As we explore the reasons behind the evolution of this iconic symbol, our first stop on this journey takes us to the cultural phenomenon known as Romanticism. Emerging in the late 18th century, Romanticism was a reaction against the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and logic. It celebrated emotion, individualism, and a reverence for nature. And guess what? It also had a thing for the past, particularly medieval history. Artists, writers, and thinkers began to view earlier periods with a sense of longing and nostalgia, often idealizing them as simpler and more authentic times. And the Vikings, with their tales of bravery, adventure, and clashes with Christian Europe, became a prime subject of this fascination. In Scandinavia, where countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway were forging their modern identities, the Viking Age, which lasted from around 793 to 1066 AD, became a potent symbol of national pride. The Vikings, with their seafaring prowess, exploration, and military exploits, were celebrated as the heroic ancestors of modern Scandinavians. Our next stop is the world of 19th century theater, particularly the operas of Richard Wagner. Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen, a cycle of four epic operas composed between 1848 and 1874, had a profound impact on how Vikings were portrayed in art and popular culture. The works, based on Norse mythology, demanded elaborate costumes and sets, and what could be more eye-catching than horned helmets? These helmets, often depicted as menacing or heroic, became a staple of Viking imagery in opera houses across Europe. Hold up, because we've got another twist in our tale. The 19th century saw a surge in interest in medieval history and folklore. Museums and private collectors alike were on the hunt for artifacts from the past, and when it came to Viking Age helmets, they weren't exactly swimming in options. You see, Viking material culture, including helmets, was not as prevalent or well understood as other artifacts. The helmet you're picturing right now, the classic horned Viking helmet, wasn't just an artistic flourish by 19th century creators. It was often based on a limited understanding of Viking artifacts mixed with a generous helping of artistic license. For example, a few ceremonial helmets from earlier European cultures, such as the Bronze Age Viksu helmets found in Denmark, feature horn-like protrusions. These were mistakenly associated with the Vikings, even though they predated the Viking Age by centuries. This lack of clarity allowed 19th century artists to fill in the blanks with their own interpretations. Many of them created designs that were visually striking but historically inaccurate, featuring horned helmets that became synonymous with Vikings. Speaking of helmets, have you ever wondered about the helmets worn by the Spartans? Check out our video on the Spartan helmet to learn more about the iconic headgear of another fierce warrior culture. Back to the Vikings, our journey through the history of the horned Viking helmet wouldn't be complete without acknowledging the contributions of 19th century painters and illustrators. These artistic visionaries immortalized the Vikings through their paintings and illustrations, and many of them opted for the dramatic flair of the horned helmet. Painters like August Malmström and Lawrence Froelich produced stunning works that depicted Vikings in all their glory, or maybe it was their horned helmets that caught the viewer's attention. Their creations became popular and helped solidify the image of the Vikings in the public imagination. By the late 19th century, the image of the horned Viking helmet was everywhere. It graced advertisements, political cartoons, and even children's books. This widespread recognition made the horned helmet a shorthand for strength, exoticism, and even barbarism, depending on the context. As we entered the 20th century, the legacy of the horned Viking helmet continued. Hollywood films like The Vikings 1958 starring Kirk Douglas further cemented this image in the minds of audiences worldwide. So now you might be wondering, with all this evidence pointing to the 19th century, did Vikings actually wear horned helmets? And the answer is a resounding probably not. Archaeological evidence shows that real Viking helmets were primarily designed for protection, not aesthetics. The few surviving examples, like the German Boo helmet found in Norway, tell the story of their practicality. These helmets were simple, often made of iron, and featured basic elements such as a dome-shaped crown and eye guards. There was nothing remotely resembling a pair of horns. Now that we've cleared up this historical misconception, don't worry, we've got plenty of videos on the Vikings and their fascinating headgear. So stay tuned for more. In the meantime, feel free to roam the halls of our server and check out our other content. In conclusion, the Viking helmet with horns, while an iconic image in popular culture, is largely a product of artistic interpretation and nationalistic fervor during the 19th century. From the influence of Romanticism to the grandeur of Wagnerian opera and the allure of medieval folklore, the 19th century was a hotbed for romanticizing the Vikings and their culture. This era also saw a surge in interest in history and archaeology, although interpretations were often more imaginative than accurate. The result was a Viking warrior with a horned helmet, a figure that captured the public's imagination and became synonymous with the Vikings. While the horned helmet may not have been part of the actual Viking tradition, it has secured its place in history as an enduring symbol of adventure, bravery, and the human fascination with the past. Now you know the true story behind one of history's most iconic headpieces. The Viking helmet with horns, a testament to the power of art and storytelling in shaping our perceptions of the past. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It helps us reach a wider audience and keep the historical tales alive. Also, don't forget to subscribe for more captivating stories from history. Thanks for joining us on this journey through time. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the past.